Okay, this video I'm going to show you how to install the bootloader and firmware update for the Drum-mux if you have a version of the Drum-mux that's affected by the accent bug described in the forum. The Drum-mux itself doesn't have any outputs that could be used for a two-way connection to the Circle-on, which is why it doesn't have or didn't have a bootloader for allowing firmware updates in the first place. Because of the discovery of this accent bug, I've had to find a solution for that problem. So if you have a Drum-mux which doesn't have the bootloader installed, when you power it up, you'll see the LED flashes very quickly multiple times. If you've got a newer Drum-mux and it has the bootloader installed, then that pattern of flashes at power on is different. So I'll show you that once we've installed the update. So in order to install the update, you need this kind of simple bit of circuitry, but it adds an output path from the Drum-mux so that it can communicate with the Circle-on two-directionally. So to do this install, the desktop Drum-mux, we'll need to take it apart. It's 8 screws holding the Drum-mux together, 4 in the top, and 2 in each side. The screws that are next to the I/O board on the sides are actually shorter, unless some of the Drum-muxes have all of the screws are shorter screws, but for a lot of them we use a normal length of 8mm screws, except for the 6mm screws on the I/O board, so that the screws don't hit PCB inside. So take care that you're putting short screws back in to those two holes when you're reassembling. So with the screws all out, just lift the top of the Drum-mux up, tilt it forward like this. You'll see the I/O board has a ribbon cable that connects onto the main board. So you just hold on to the board and pull that connector off. Obviously in the Euro version there'll also be the Euro power cable, and the power cable will need to be connected to the Euro power supply in order to do the update. But obviously that's going to vary depending on your own particular setup. So once we've got it apart, the program adapter board then has a cable that plugs into the Drum-mux main board, and the cable from the I/O board in the Drum-mux plugs into this socket at this end of the program adapter, and it should be able to just hang over the end of your case there. If it's going to sit on top of the case like that, it might be as well to put a piece of cardboard or something non-conductive in, just in the off chance that any of these pins scratch through the paint and short circuit. It's very unlikely to do so, but just in case. Okay, so the connections from the Circle-on to do this update: the Drum-mux cable comes from the sync socket and goes to the Drum-mux input as normal. But then for this return path to the Circle-on, this MIDI cable is plugged into MIDI port 1, and it plugs into the DIN socket on the programming adapter board, like that. Okay, so the firmware update process is hidden in the debug pages. Shift and insert to get to those, and then shift and press key 5 to get to the Dmux tools. You see the options there are firmware update and bootloader install. The bootloader install also includes the firmware update process. Once the bootloader's been installed, if there's a future firmware update for the Drum-mux, then you don't need to install the program adapter board. There's a process by which we can force the Drum-mux into firmware update mode just as normal. But in this case, I'm going to choose bootloader install. So you see it says connected Dmux program adapter, which we've done, sync to the Dmux in, program out, which is this one, to MIDI in 1, and then power up the Drum-mux. When you power it up this time, the LED won't flash because it's being held and reset by this programming adapter board. So when we press shift to start here, the Circle-on will check that it can speak to the processor in the Drum-mux board, put it into program mode, and then write both the bootloader and the updated version of the firmware. It just takes a wee minute to run through that. And once it's written it, it reads it back, makes sure it's correct. And then when it's finished, it's the programming complete, power off the Drum-mux, and disconnect the adapter. Okay, and that's basically the job finished. Just going to plug the main board back into the I/O board. Put the lid back on the Drum-mux. Put the screws in. Remembering to put the shorter screws in beside the I/O board. Just to save time, I'll not bother putting all the screws in now. Just want to show you that if you look at the RX LED now, when I power it up, because it has the new firmware installed, it does a pattern of long flash, short flash, long flash, short flash, which shows that the bootloader is installed and also a fixed version of the firmware. So if you watch, long flash, short flash, long flash, short flash, which is quite distinct from the rapid flashes that you'd see in a version that doesn't have the bootloader installed. So that's us ready to go. Accent output's working if you were suffering from that problem before.